Hey folks, Dust here, and I wanted to follow up the weapon balance video I did for the Valorant closed beta by talking about the agents themselves and kind of just discussing the balance of their skills as it stands right now for the very beginnings of Valorant. And of course, there's not much data out there for Riot to work with. This is just now opening up to a bigger player population, so I'm sure that right now, again, it's a lot about just collecting data, seeing what works, what doesn't, and so I'm not going to be overly critical about any of these skills or anything like that, because, I mean, you have to throw it out there first, get some play testing before you can truly know what you have. And obviously we don't have really any esports scene yet for Valorant, so we don't get to see a lot of top level competition against each other regularly. I know we've had some small little tournaments with Twitch rivals and stuff like that here and there, but it's a little bit different when you actually get into tournament play with organized teams and things of that nature. So again, these are initial impressions. Take all of this with a grain of salt, but this is just kind of where I feel things sit right now. Again, if you don't know my background, I come from Counter-Strike. I am a commentator and desk analyst from CS. I have worked with many different tournaments over the last several years in CSGO in those roles, and so, you know, I do have that bias coming into it. And again, there's a lot of Counter-Strike-esque stuff in this game, and so I think that I feel I have some knowledge coming into it. And so I'm going to go through kind of each of the characters just in order of how they are in the practice area, just talk a little bit about the issues that I have with them and what I think needs to maybe be looked at. So when it comes to Brimstone, the biggest issue I have with Brimstone is the fact that his smoke ability is just way too easy. I mean, it's just so easy to play smokes. Every other character in this game that has some type of wall or some type of smoke capability is something they actually have to aim. Even Omen smoke, which I'll talk about later, is something you still have to place even if it can go through walls, and it has a travel time that takes a bit. These smokes have very little travel time, they're incredibly easy to aim, and they last for a really long time. I think his smokes last like around 15 seconds a piece. So if you wanted to hold off one choke point, you could legit smoke off an area for 45 seconds, almost. And it doesn't really take much effort to do so. Or with Brimstone, you can legitimately execute a bomb site by yourself almost. I mean, think of a map like Haven. If you were attacking into the A bomb site, you could smoke off Heaven, you could smoke off like the hut area that connects, you know, the defender spawn into A, you could smoke off sewers, or you could do a lot of smokes through the center of the site, as well as the smoke in Heaven. Obviously, if you were attacking C site, you could basically smoke off the entire site, your entire path that you need to travel. When you combine it with other people's skills as well, it just becomes ridiculous. I think this skill is just way too easy to use. Again, I think that his smokes last way too long for the fact that it takes very little skill to place them, and so I'm not sure exactly what you would do if you just make the smokes last less time, because I think he has like the longest lasting smoke in the game, or one of the longest lasting smokes in the game. And again, it just feels like it doesn't really take any actual ability of the player to make his smokes work. And so that's the biggest issue I have with him. I don't really have an issue with the stem or his incendiary, and even his ult is avoidable. And again, discussing ults is difficult because I tend to be someone that doesn't want to see ults be very powerful, but I get it's something that you don't get very often. It's something you have to earn. It's something you might only get to use a couple of times a half. And so I don't want to go like too crazy on criticizing ults, especially because his, while it is very powerful, is at least avoidable, and it certainly isn't as powerful as some other alts out there. So this is my big gripe with Brimstone. So with Jet, it's like the polar opposite. Her smokes are very underwhelming. She does get 3 of them, but they only last for somewhere between like 3 and 5 seconds. I think it's under 5 seconds. I tried to time out the stopwatch. I couldn't find the actual information out there. I don't know if it does exist. If it does, please tell me. I was actually trying to look up damage stats and lengths of time for some of these skills, but I just could not find them anywhere online. I know on the buy menu, they have all the weapon stats pretty much right there for you as far as damage goes, but when you try to look up skills, they don't really give you much information in-game other than a brief description of the skill. So I'm kind of just working off of what I've been able to gather manually. And yeah, the smokes for Jet just seem really underwhelming, that they just last such a short amount of time, especially when you compare it to, say, Omen smoke, or compare it to Brimstone that we just talked about. That's my biggest concern with Jet, is that the smokes need to last a little bit longer, in my opinion. Maybe not crazy long, like 10 or 15 seconds, like a Brimstone smoke, but I think something a little bit longer than 3 to 4 seconds. You know, that just seems it's not nearly as helpful. I mean, it's helpful for like a quick little play or something like that if you're trying to make a quick little push. So that's my biggest thing with her. Other than that, I like her skills. I like her passive ability to drift. I think her uplift is great. She's one of the few characters that can boost on top of larger objects to get a new angle or get a new peek off on someone. Obviously, her dash is great for an evade or for an aggressive push. And then her ult doesn't seem overly powerful. I mean, yeah, it can one-tap, but so can many other weapons that you buy on the menu, and then it takes 3 body shots to do. Now, obviously, it also has the scatter shot capability, where if you can land all of them, you're obviously crushing them, even if you hit them in the body. But it just doesn't seem crazy OP, again, especially considering the fact that it's comparable damage to some of the weapons that you buy. The biggest thing with it, obviously, is the fact that you're going to have, you know, complete accuracy even while you're moving is the big benefit of it. So I think it's actually pretty balanced for an alt. If anything, it's not as strong as some of the other alts out there. It's just strong because of how you can combo it with movement, but not necessarily in pure damage. So again, other than the smokes being underwhelming, I think Jet's kit's actually pretty awesome. Now we talk about Omen. I actually don't really have anything to really gripe about Omen. I think, you know, obviously the teleport might, you know, really anger some people, but the fact that there is a way to stop it because you can see his figure, there is a time period. His alt teleport obviously is really powerful because you can probably avoid being detected if you're smart with how you place your teleport. Otherwise, I don't really have an issue with him teleporting. Again, it allows him to get on top of things that other people can't, besides like Jet, or I guess Raze can C4 herself up. And then obviously Sage has her wall ability to get on top of things. So I don't really have any issue with him. I think all of his skills seem pretty fair. Obviously, the fact he can smoke through walls and stuff like that is annoying, but when you compare it to Brimstone, it still actually takes some ability to aim and kind of know where to place things to be able to actually get them to go properly. And they have a pretty long travel time, so you do know that it's coming, and even a charge time, so you can kind of be prepared for it. And it doesn't last as long as Brimstone smoke. It lasts a little bit shorter, but certainly more than Jet's. I think it's like around the 10-second mark, if I'm not mistaken, compared to Brimstone, which is closer to 15, and then Jet's, again, closer to like 3 to 5. So I'm actually totally fine with Omen. I don't really have any issues. I think he's actually in a pretty good place right now, at least in the play that I've seen. Again, I haven't seen any top-level professional competition, but all in all, I can't really gripe too much about Omen. With Phoenix, he's one of the most complete characters in the game, as he has basically a Molotov, he has a flashbang, or you could get up to 2 flashbangs, and he has a wall that can also block vision. The one thing I do wonder is it feels like his flashbangs are almost impossible to avoid. They don't necessarily last a crazy long amount of time. They last long enough for him to just be able to get out, get a peek, you're blind, and I just don't see a way that you can dodge it. I don't think there's enough of a noise cue. You know, in CS, we have the ability to hear the pin being pulled. I don't know if you can actually hear his snap if you're up against him. I've never heard it, but maybe I just wasn't close enough to him when he did it. But I do wonder if maybe his flash is just like ridiculously hard to avoid. Certainly, that could also just be that I'm not used to looking out for it as much as I'm used to looking out for a flashbang in CSGO, for example. So it could be more of a just I need to play more and get more familiar with looking out for it. But I am a little bit questioning how powerful the flash really is. I'm not sure if it would need to have a longer travel time before it pops, so that way it can be a little bit easier to avoid, or if maybe it shouldn't last as long as it does. It's just something I think that maybe could be looked at, but that's really the only gripe I have about Phoenix right now, is just the inability to avoid his flash. Alright, when it comes to Raze, I actually don't have as much of a problem with her as many people do. But I do wonder if maybe her grenade is a little bit too strong. I think it should just be a grenade. I mean, it is one of the only true explosive skills that we have in the game. Everything else is like Molotov or Poison or a slow or something like that. So this is like the main grenade we have. I think we need to have a grenader in the game. But the fact that it's a cluster and it can just do so much extra damage with those little things is maybe a bit too much. I think just a pure grenade would probably have been better. Or maybe the cluster should just do a little bit less damage. C4 I don't really have too much trouble with. I think it's neat that it gives her some movement capabilities. You know, she wants to travel somewhere a little bit faster, or get on top of something, or cross a gap, or, you know, actually just do pure damage. I actually think it's great. But let's be real, this rocket launcher alt is fucking unbelievable how good it is. It's almost impossible to miss with it. And even if you're decently far away from a target, you're still doing so much damage, if not straight up blast them into the netherworld and doing just enough damage to get a full frag. I mean, it's just like a free kill, basically. And again, I know it's something that you only get so often, but it just feels a little bit too easy. I don't know if maybe the travel time needs to be a little bit longer, that way there's a better chance to avoid it, or if it needs to do a little bit less damage, or something along those lines. But I just think it needs to be addressed. I think it's a little bit too powerful in my opinion. Alright, let's look at Sage. Sage, I do think her wall lasts a little bit too long. That's one issue I do have, is that her wall just lasts a bit too long. I think it lasts like a really, really long time. I think maybe like 35 to 45 seconds if you just let it play all the way out. I know it can be broken, and so maybe you don't need to adjust the length that much, if at all. But I just kind of wonder about it just a little bit. Maybe something just to kind of take a brief look at, but something I'm not like super concerned about. Now, this slow grenade is pretty insane. I don't know that it should slow you as much as it does, or make this much noise. The biggest problem I have with it is when it gets thrown on top of you. If it lands on top of you and you find yourself in the dead center of it, I mean, you basically can't do anything but stay still and hope for the best, or hope that you have a character with some type of movement ability, like Jet's Dash, to be able to get out of it, or C4 your way out of it with Raze, for example. You have to kind of hope for something like that. Otherwise, you're basically fucked. Because you're going to make noise if you try to get out of it, and if you're dead center, you have to travel one direction to make noise when you have no choice, or you have to just sit in it and then you're stuck. So I do wonder about that just a little bit. I know that's a bit situational. I think using it kind of like a Molotov to stop people from pushing or discouraging a push is a fine use, but the fact that you can get trapped inside of it if it lands on you, like if she basically puts it in a corner or something like that you're inside of, then you just can't get out and you're just stuck in there and you make noise. And I just wonder a little bit about it. I'm not sure exactly what you would tweak to maybe balance it a little bit more. Maybe you don't touch it at all. Maybe it's just something I have to get used to, but just something to think about. And the heals. The heal is really, really powerful, and it's dead cheap. I mean, I feel like the skills overall in this game are cheap. I guess I'll just throw that out there now. Like, what, most skills are 100 to 200 credits, and you can afford them so easily. I talked about this a little bit in the weapon balance video, where even on like round 1, you can afford so many abilities on every single character. You can basically do like a full execute with smokes and the whole 9. So I do wonder if maybe these abilities need to be scaled better with pricing. But her heal and her res are so incredibly strong. And I really feel in a 5-on-5 round-based format game, it doesn't feel like a game that like a res makes sense to have in. I get you might only get to do it like a couple of times a half, but it can just be such a game changer. Because you don't have to be right on top of someone to use it. You can just be somewhere nearby. And it's just such a round-changing moment if you're able to get the res off. Because usually there's going to be some cover for you to get a res off on somebody. And so I just feel like a res doesn't have a place in the game like this. So I feel like a different alt would be better. Maybe like something that heals everyone that's still currently alive, rather than actually resing a dead person. You know, something like that I think would make a little bit more sense. I don't want to completely shoot res all the way down, because I know it's really early days, but obviously that's something that really needs to be looked at in the future. And maybe the amount that you get to heal with your heal skill, or maybe the price of the heal skill, needs to be looked at. Something needs to be done to balance it a little bit more, in my opinion. Sova, I actually don't really have too much to complain about. I do find it a little bit odd that his drone also can shoot a dart. It feels like the fact that a drone can scout is enough in itself, so to also get a dart does feel a bit odd to me. So I do wonder about that a little bit, but I'm not necessarily saying that anything needs to be changed. The only thing I don't really like is that his ult can also spot someone if it gets a tag or gets nearby or something like that. And I think it's already, you know, powerful enough that it can go through walls and do a lot of damage. And you usually are probably going to get intel or kind of have an idea of where someone is before you shoot it. So I wonder a little bit about the fact that it gives a blip of where someone is when you shoot it, the alt that is. But again, I don't really think there needs to be drastic changes to Sova. I think Sova's in actually a pretty fine place, especially considering that his, you know, main scouting ability has to have line of sight. So if you're hiding behind a box or a wall, you won't get spotted. So that kind of makes it to where I'm not as concerned about it. And you can shoot it, and it doesn't last that long. So I don't really think that there's actually too much gripe to have about his, like, sonar arrow, whatever you want to call it. With Breach, I don't have a crazy amount to say, because I don't really have many games against him or with him to comment too much on him. I think overall some of his abilities just seem a bit too strong. Kind of like the Flash with Phoenix, I think it's a little bit too hard to avoid. I just feel like it doesn't really have that much travel time, and so there's really not much of a chance to avoid if it comes through the wall. I mean, I know you can hear it charging on the wall, so you kind of know it's coming. but it's just such a low travel time that it just feels like there's no chance to avoid it whatsoever. And then other than that, yeah, obviously his skills are just incredibly strong. But I don't want to say anything too much about balancing him yet. Maybe some of the damage could be tweaked, but I don't think the skills themselves are too powerful. I feel like, you know, his different pathways that he can do, whether it be this or his ult, are avoidable, right? You can kind of see the floor. You the ult has a cascading effect, so you definitely have your chances to avoid it, just like you have a chance to avoid the orbital strike of Brimstone. So I actually don't know that I would change too much about him, other than maybe some of the damage that he has with his wall charge. All right, so let's talk about Cipher. Cipher is probably the character I feel is maybe one of the most overpowered in the game when it comes to his actual skills. For one, his camera, you cannot see it unless he is using it, which makes it a little bit harder to break. And I don't know if that's necessarily right. I think you should maybe not, I don't know if you should always be able to see it, because then it just becomes a little bit too easy to break. But I don't know. I almost think that you should always be able to see it, which means he has to be smarter about placing it, and he needs to make sure he gets his use out of it before it gets spotted, instead of just being able to toggle back and forth. Because what if he toggled it, sees someone, immediately toggles off? Now you can't destroy it, and now it's always there for him to use. So I do wonder if maybe the camera shouldn't be completely undetectable, or just something needs to be looked at with that, I think. Now let me tell you my biggest gripe that I have with him. This tripwire is impossible to deal with as it stands. If you run through it, you obviously get owned. Fair enough. I can deal with that. However, even if you slow walk up to it and discover it, if you destroy it, he gets alerted. So it still has its intended effect even if you outsmart it. I mean, I know that theoretically if you poorly place it, you could jump over it. But 9 times out of 10, Cipher's not going to be dumb enough to place it in such a way that it's very easy to crouch under or jump over. I mean, if you're just halfway intelligent with how you place it, you know, there's no way to avoid it except for maybe Jet being able to, you know, do an updraft over it. Or maybe, like, you teleport past it, I guess, with Omen. Or something along those lines, I guess. But in reality, it just seems like there should be some type of way, if you're smart enough to creep up and discover it, that you should be able to disarm it without Cipher being alerted to the fact that you did. Otherwise, it just feels like it's a guaranteed information play, even if they figure it out. And I think that's actually a really, really big problem with Cipher. I don't really care too much about his camera. I mean, I have a little bit of gripe with it, but not too much. I think his little deployable smoke, basically, that he has is fine. But this tripwire, this really irks me, and I think it needs to be looked at. And then finally, we'll talk about Viper. And honestly, I don't really have any issue with her at all. I think all of her skills are fairly fair. I mean, she has like a poison, which kind of acts like a Molotov. Obviously has her little grenade that she uses fuel to deploy as a type of smoke grenade, which can last a really long time, but it's at a sacrifice of her fuel. And so in reality, it doesn't last that much longer than maybe like a Brimstone smoke or something like that if you fully go all the way out. I do wonder about this skill a bit because I feel like it just travels so incredibly far. I do wonder if the range of it maybe needs to be looked at, because it does just seem like it can just do so much across like almost an entire map, really. So I do wonder if maybe there should be a limit on its length, similar to Phoenix's Firewall. And then her ult's too strong. I'm sorry. I mean, basically it lasts forever as long as she stays inside of it. So that's problem number 1. Problem number 2 is she already gets a vision benefit from, you know, casting it and being inside of it. So why is it that it also does damage over time? I mean, basically its main use is for retake situations or stopping it from being diffused. So the fact that it gives her the vision capability and it does so much damage, it just seems like you got to give up one. Either take away her vision capability inside of it, or make it to where it doesn't really do as much damage as it does over time, because otherwise it just becomes impossible to play into, really, it feels like. So that's definitely another gripe I have about Viper, but her other skills to me seem fine. I mean, that really about does it for me. I don't want to be too overly critical about any of the balance of these characters because, again, it's very early days. But it just seems to me like there are a few glaring things. I mean, to review, Brimstone Smoke are too easy to use, in my opinion. Jet Smokes are underwhelming. Phoenix's flashes seem way too hard to avoid. Raze's ult seems insane. I think her cluster grenade is also a bit overpowered. I think Sage's slow grenade might need to be a little bit tweaked, though I don't think it's necessarily a priority for me. And I think that Cipher's tripwires are just way too ridiculous that they can't be disengaged without alerting him. And then, yeah, Viper's ult just seems a little bit too much. And maybe her wall has a little bit too much range. And I'll leave it at that. Hope you folks enjoyed the video. If you did, follow subscribe for more content. Catch you next time.